You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast, a proud member of the Unveiled podcast network. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Captivate, and Apple Podcast. You could join them on one of those networks, or you can support the show by making a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the show's description. In this episode, there will be some sensitive themes and possibly strong language used. We advise if you have children to tune back in some other time. Otherwise, just be prepared for some sensitive topics, and we hope you enjoy the show.
1 Peter 2:21-25 say, "For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was insulted, he did not insult in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that, having died to sins, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were like sheep going astray, but you have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." In this pericope, the author is describing the response we should have to Jesus' sacrificial love. Dr. Oord, for this Good Friday, what do you think Jesus' sacrifice truly accomplished, and how should we look to this event as an example, in your opinion?
I think Jesus was killed by the empire. I think Jesus could have used violence to try to resist the empire. He may or may not have succeeded, but he chose not to use violence and ended up dying because of decisions made by those in power. In the time of Trump, we have something to learn from Jesus. We should resist empire, but do it non-violently.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast special bonus episode we're excited to do for you guys. Part of an ongoing, trilogy on the Unveiled Podcast Network. Starting this off was way back when, originally, really, truly, we're going to go like the origins. Dr. Thomas J. Oord wrote a book, The Death of Omnipotence and the Birth of Amipotence. I think that's correct. And then recently, there was a 2-volume set that he orchestrated of critiques and criticisms and expansions and support for his idea of omnipotence. And then we did a panel of that on the Whole Church Podcast. I think that was back in February. That was with Thomas J. Oord, Josh Patterson, myself, and Aaron Simmons. From that, did I mention Nick Polk? Nick Polk. And from that, I realized Nick, who's part of the book, was talking about like pop culture references and how we see that the culture also doesn't really like this idea of omnipotence. And I was like, wait, why didn't we talk about Mr. Purple in that? So then we did a whole research project, me, Nick Polk, and then Pastor Will Rose, friend of the show, also one of the other hosts on Systematic Ecology, read the omnibus of the Alias comics, Alias Jessica Jones, as well as rewatched the Netflix Season 1 of the same show, Jessica Jones, and we kind of reviewed it, thinking about it through the lens of this idea of omnipotence, controlling power, coercive love, and amnipotence. And now to close off the podcast trilogy. So we did the first one on the Whole Church Podcast. We did the second one on Systematic Ecology. And now we're back on the Whole Church Podcast. And Dr. Thomas J. Oord and Josh Patterson are going to tell me how terrible the podcast on Systematic Ecology was, and how we all are going to go to hell, but hell doesn't exist, so that doesn't make sense. So then we're going to have to like explain that paradox on like a whole separate trilogy. But so that's what we're here to do today. I'm excited to have Josh Patterson and Thomas J. Oord back with us to continue this conversation. Guys, thank you so much for joining me in my convoluted nonsense.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. I'm always excited to talk theology, and when we can get nerdy with it too, it's a fun time. And the reason this one's back over here is mostly because I'm hoping this can kind of show us where maybe we have some disagreements here and there, and we're not, or tweaks on the same idea maybe, but we can still work together in unity for those who are truly in Christ, which I think means in love, which is very close to a lot of what Dr. Oord, I think, is getting at in all this idea. So that's what we're going to be unpacking. The only one of us who has not listened to that podcast is TJ Tiberius Blackwell, and that's because he already knows all things, so he doesn't need to listen to podcasts.
I just don't really like podcasts.
Yeah, but it's because he created them, so he's already over it. Yeah. So welcome to your show. Welcome to your podcast that you love to not listen to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you don't agree with me and you actually quite like podcasts, you should check out the other ones on the Unveiled Podcast Network website. Link is below to check that out. And then if you feel like supporting us when I won't do it, other than monetarily, because I do that. But you can subscribe. It's super helpful. It's the easiest thing in the world. Helps us a lot.
Also, you lost. You said doo-doo.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Finally, guys, before we get to the meat of this, you guys know I always like to start with a silly question, and I thought about skipping it because this is a bonus. But then I thought of a great one since this is going to be releasing on Good Friday. I was like, I know what we'll do, especially if I have Josh Patterson. We'll get as heretical as I think we can. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be completely irreverent. We're going to get heretical here. And you know what? In fact, instead of actually, you know what? I am going to answer first. And then I'm going to make the other Josh answer because, Josh that's our expertise is heresy. So we'll start with us. And then TJ and Tom, we'll have the two TJs. So the two Joshes, then the two TJs. Yeah. In today's silly question, heresy attached, happy Good Friday. Jesus on the cross, he had a really cool catchphrase. That someone pulled a drawstring and he said, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And I want to know, if you were to pick from any other movie, show, book, whatever, what is the worst catchphrase Jesus could have said on the cross? I'm going to go first from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think it would have been great if Jesus was hanging on the cross. He would have looked out to the crowd and said, "So long, and thanks for all the fish." I think that would have been great. So, Josh, give me some heretical silliness.
Oh my goodness, man! This is one that I feel like I needed time to think about. No, it's good. I'm trying to pull from places that I enjoy or that I quote often. Thing that Jesus did say on the cross is not super great. I don't know.
I'm sorry. I did spring this on everybody.
It's all good. Yeah. Can I have, maybe I feel like TJ in his infinite wisdom probably already has an answer. Can I be returned to, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Give me a second.
I'll throw out a secondary one.
There's just so
TJ
many.
already has an answer. Okay, go ahead.
There's so many catchphrases, and it's hard to think of a really good catchphrase in the moment, but I'm going to go with the worst one. Probably "It's clobbering time."
Yeah, that'd been great.
That's the worst one I can think of. That or "Flame On," the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, all of them have terrible. Yeah. Backup one, while our guests are thinking. Going to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think it would have been great if Jesus would have just shouted "Cowabunga." That would have been...
No, Turtle Power.
Yeah, Turtle Power. Yeah, that's... Tom, Josh, do either of you have an answer to this terrible question?
I have an answer. I have an answer. Actually, it's from Monty Python.
Yes!
You know the Monty Python?
Theology Beer Camp.
Yeah. Jesus on the cross leans over to Peter and says, "Hey, I can see your house from up here."
Fantastic. All right, Josh. Let's come back circle. Now you have to give the greatest heresy since you're last.
No, I got nothing, dude. To be honest with you, all that keeps coming to mind is Borat quotes, and I'm quite fond of Borat. So if Jesus was on the cross and was like, "Very nice," like that.
I think that would be some great last words.
This cross is nice. Wow, wow, we were. Yeah, I don't know. That's all that comes to mind.
That would be a great way for him to stick it to the man. Going back to the government.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I just
other ones involve the F word, and since Tom is present, I respect him too much to speak that way.
God, yeah. I would say he also could have pulled from the Deadpool and Wolverine movie with "Let's effing go." That would
maximum effort.
Yeah.
That might be a good one. Maximum effort.
Maximum effort. That kind of like a more badass.
That's essential.
Jesus,
that's essential kenosis. If Jesus is on the cross and we see that as the Christ Jesus emptying himself, maximum effort, it works.
I should have known that somehow this would have got like actually theological and not just like, all right. So before we actually get to the reviewing part, I did want to dig a little bit deeper into this, your idea, amipotence. So that is all love rather than all power, which is omnipotence. So that's kind of to just kind of catch people up. The idea that you're positing is that omnipotence, which is this doctrine that God has all power, needs to be done away with. And instead, we need to think of God as all loving, and love being the kind of power that God has. And go watch the other episodes. I'll link them down below in the show notes for those who kind of want to catch up on all the nitty gritty details of all that. But before we get to the other stuff, since we're talking about amipotence, I thought it would be interesting to give you a chance to speak about that through the lens of Good Friday and Easter, since this is releasing on Good Friday. So did you want to, maybe just riff on that a little bit?
Sure. I think shorthand, I like to say amipotence is God's power of uncontrolling love. Because sometimes people will think, well, the power of love still might be controlling from time to time. And I'm pretty clear that I think amipotence never controls, and God can't control anyone or anything at any time. When it comes to the cross and Good Friday or the Passion, I think Christians have wrestled with trying to figure out what exactly is being revealed. On the one hand, I think I want to strongly affirm Jesus as an actual human who is put to death by the empire and whose suffering is true suffering as a human. But I think we have license to wonder if even in this suffering and death, Jesus tells us something about God. If Jürgen Moltmann were here, he would really emphasize this point, that the suffering and death of Jesus tells us about the suffering and death of God. Now that brings up a really difficult issue, and that is, how can a God who necessarily exists die? And that's a huge question theologically. I don't know if we can solve it right now, but setting that one aside just for a moment, I think we could at least say that this human Jesus points us to or reveals a God of suffering love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I like that. This is not going to be an atonement theory episode, but it is interesting, since this is the Whole Church podcast and Good Friday, just kind of thinking of how, like, some of our listeners are, going to be people who affirm something like penal substitutionary atonement theory, that this is the big day for them, right? That, like, Christ died for their sins, and that's a sacrificial love act. For me, myself, being more like Christus Victor, I guess, would probably be the thing I'm closest to. I'm like, this is a cool day because it makes the big thing possible. But this is just kind of like the prequel series. The original series is the best Star Wars. We all know that. Easter is the big day. This is just kind of getting us there. But I know everybody kind of has like different views of this, but it is interesting. I think love is kind of at the center of pretty much every view I can think of. The question is whether or not we actually think that's love.
Yeah, theoretically it's at the center, but more than half of them, I think, suck. They don't portray a God of love.
I agree with Tom.
Including the penal satisfaction one.
Yeah, well, I think for me personally, and I don't want to distance people who do the penal substitutionary atonement theory, but to me, it feels more like in that theory, Jesus is very loving because he's sacrificing for us. But God is not very loving, right? Because he's requiring the sacrifice. And it's like, well, couldn't the dude just be like, nah, y'all are good?
Exactly.
Something seems off there to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we are here to talk about today is the Systematic Ecology podcast on Mr. Purple, and also this is a podcast about amipotence. It's the same-ish, which was in response to the Whole Church, which was in response to the book, which I'm not sure what convinced Tom to write the book, but,
maybe God.
This all started somewhere.
Maybe God started this. Maybe God started it because TJ whispered in his ears, like, wait a minute, what about love? And God was like...
Yeah, so what about love? What about love? So, Josh, you were on that episode.
That's true. Yeah. I can unpack a little bit, just kind of the basics. For those who don't know and don't feel like listening to us geeks on the other podcast, Mr. Purple, the reason I thought of it, his whole character, which before he got more popular, it was not as big a deal. He was just someone who could control you with speech. And then Ben just was like, actually, that's a terrifying concept, right? Like someone who can just control people. And then it kind of gets into this discussion of like, is he raping people? Because, he doesn't even know sometimes if they're doing it because they want to or because he said it. And it gets into this conversation, all these different weird grayish areas where like he desperately wants love, but maybe is incapable of it because he's constantly controlling people. And then the questions I think we brought up in that episode are kind of revolving around this idea of, is it really love if it's controlling? And then also, if a being is controlling, whether it be God or Mr. Purple, are they even capable of love? You know what I mean? Like, because Mr. Purple, for him, since no one can choose to love him because he's controlling, love is something he can't truly grasp. So if we're going to put that same characteristic on God, my question is, does that mean God can't love? And that makes a lot of theology difficult. I think that's kind of the basis of what we touched on the episode. Y'all, anything I missed? Because I haven't listened to that in a minute, to be honest. Or where do y'all want to start?
I mean, for me, so I listened to the episode this morning, and one of the things that came to mind for me was actually kind of two ideas that, like I said, came to mind when you all were speaking, and I'd be interested. I have a guess. Like I have a guess if I were to put on my Tom Oord hat and be like, how would Tom answer this question? I think I could maybe get 75% of the way there, but maybe I'll throw the two things out there and then we can see what Tom thinks. So the two things that came to mind were this in listening. Coercion isn't always necessarily bad, and persuasion isn't always necessarily good. And so Tom's argument is predicated on the idea that coercion is bad and persuasion is a better form of power. But I can think of instances when both coercion and persuasion could be flipped. So I'm not here to ask questions, but that's what came to mind.
Hey, I love questions. Before Tom takes that, though, could you just kind of tell us, how would you define coercion and persuasion and the difference so that we're actually addressing what you're getting at?
Yeah, no, that's good. Actually, I was at a talk recently with two nerdy philosophers, and the one guy said like, hey, before we start, I'm going to give a definition of this word that I'm using, because if I define it, you and I can disagree, but at least we won't be confused. And he was like, I'd rather have disagreement than confusion. So I think your instincts are right. Coercion, I think, would be to force might be too strong of a word, but to coerce somebody is to force them, to manipulate them into doing something that you want them to do. So that's, like, I don't know. Yeah, that'd be coercive. Or whereas persuasion is more using the power of influence or invitation. To persuade somebody is not to override their free will, but rather to invite them into considering something, and then they still have that free choice of agreeing, participating, or whatever. So that's how I would see those two as different. Well, you could ask the philosopher to give technical.
Tom, jump in here.
Yeah, I think there are three senses of coercion that are used, and because there's three of them, there's lots of confusion that arises. One sense of coercion is kind of like a threat or a bully. So if Donald Trump says, I'm going to put tariffs on Canada unless they lower their goods and services to the U.S., that's coercion, trying to force them to do something by threatening some kind of harm or financial loss or something like that. A second sense of coercion I like to call bodily impact. So if you're standing on a football field and someone hits you from a blind side, they're just going to blow you down on the ground. You're coerced. You had no choice in the matter. You didn't see it coming, and your body's now flying away. The third sense of coercion is the one that I use mostly when I'm talking about theology, and it has a particular philosophical meaning. It means being the only cause that brings about an effect. So if God were to coerce, God alone would bring about some outcome. in that use of coerce, I don't think any person ever coerces another person. In fact, I don't think any quark can coerce another quark. I think it's absolutely impossible for anyone, including God, to be the sole or single cause of some outcome. So if it's impossible, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's kind of like saying, are unicorns good or bad if they don't actually exist? I don't know. Persuasion, however, in the philosophical sense, means acting or influencing, to use that word Josh just used, influencing in such a way that there are other influences that are going to have some kind of effect upon the outcome. And I think God always persuades. I think people always persuade. So what I think we're really talking about is, should people coerce in the sense of bullying, threatening, or using bodily force on others? I think that's the big question. And in that case, there might be some cases in which using coercion in terms of bodily force is the best thing to do. If TJ and I are walking down the street and a car is about ready to hit him and I shove his body out of the car and save his life, I've coerced him in the sense of bodily impact, and he probably thinks that's a pretty good thing. In terms of threats or bullies, I'm not sure that's ever a good thing. Maybe warnings are close as one might get to a loving threat. Like if you warn someone, if you do this, then something bad will happen. So long as you're not the one doing the bad thing, I suppose it's not bullying. But
I like it a lot less when you threaten me than.
That's how I think about coercion and persuasion.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here for a second to just a couple thoughts. One, just getting to the argument. I feel so. For me, it feels like if someone's using that kind of argument against what Dr. Oord's saying about how sometimes coercion can be a good thing, it seems like a semantic issue, because it's similar to how actually I'll use the current events kind of deal, where people will kind of say, by kind of being Democrat basically, or just simply being the person at the top of the ticket. So Kamala was basically anti-Semitic because they weren't doing enough to stop Hamas. And it's like, okay, well, you're kind of redefining what anti-Semitic means. And then everyone's like, yeah, we agree being anti-Semitic is bad. But if you really look at it, it's like, well, what you're talking about isn't necessarily that, though. So you're kind of redefining terms, then attacking him off of a new term. So it's not quite a straw man argument, but it's pretty darn close. But to kind of get at what I think Josh is getting at, though, to go a little bit deeper and then go back to the show that we reviewed in Systematic Ecology. So we're talking about like the Jessica Jones show on Netflix. But one of the episodes that stood out to me that I talked about, it's basically Mr. Purple's trying to show Jessica that he can be good. He actually does want love. And that's the same episode where he's like, I genuinely don't know if people are doing stuff because they want to or because I told them. And in that, she tries to make him into a hero at one point in the episode. So they go to stop, I think it was like domestic abuse or a bank robbery. Insert generic criminal crime thing that superheroes stop here, right? And they go in, and it's incredible, right? He walks in, and he's like, hey, let the hostages go free. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. It's like, all right, stop shooting people. Yeah, right. And then he immediately goes to, now kill yourself. And Jessica goes, wow, that is not great. He's like, and his thing was, I genuinely would have never known that was the wrong thing to do. That's why I need you. And he's trying in that sense to be manipulative without directly controlling her by kind of being like, see, I need you. You have to be around. And at the same time, it's still bringing up this question of like, was it good that he stopped the crime? I guess. But like, is how he did it good? And is it even possible for it to be good? Like, your brain would be so warped by that kind of action. And I don't think God is so different from us that we could say that much different about God either. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Josh, you got an opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, what I would have to bring into the situation at this point is, or into the conversation, would have to be like some of the metaphysical assumptions and the philosophical assumptions that come with processed thought that a lot of, at least my understanding of how Tom's argument functions are built on, that don't necessarily apply to you and I, that might apply to God. So for example, one thing would be God doesn't have a physical body to be able to coerce people.
You're going to say that on Good Friday?
Well, all right. Jesus aside, we'll assume, right? Incarnation. But if we're going to do that, if you want my Good Friday take, that's a whole nother thing, because I don't think Christians take seriously enough the death of God. And I'm going to use that philosophically. But anyway, God doesn't have a physical body, which makes it very difficult to push people out of the way, to save TJ from the car. And also there's some assumptions, just within how process functions in general, like process metaphysics. But also, if you want to assume something like pan-experientialism or panpsychism, that also muddies the waters when it comes to things that God can and can't do, what would constitute as something being coercive or manipulative. Based off those assumptions, a lot of process people assume pan-experientialism to be true. That messes things up. So I think it's bigger than the argument of like, is love coercive or non-coercive? We can say, okay, we think love is not coercive in the philosophical sense. But it appears that there's things that we people can do, or Mr. Purple can do, that you're saying like, oh, if God did that, it would be bad. And it's because there's these different assumptions baked in to the God question that aren't present for you and I. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's part of the disconnect.
Yeah. Well, and that's, to me, that's why I think story is so powerful, right? Because like, as soon as I say God being controlling isn't loving, a lot of people are defensive and they're going to push back and argue back, whatever. But I could show them that TV show and be like, do you think what he did was good or bad? And it's a lot, people have a lot more freedom to really address whether or not that is good or bad. And then I think we're good. Okay, once we settle that, and you're saying God is all good, so let's take these principles and tell me how that impacts your theology at that point, right? So that's why I think it's helpful to start with story in some ways. I'm going to push you a little bit before Tom responds. Not on anything you said. I just want a clear answer on a different part of the question, I guess. When Mr. Purple stopped the crime, up until the part that he tried to get the guy to kill himself, I think we'll all agree forcing someone to kill themselves is bad. Is what he did good? He controlled a bunch of people. He forced them to let the hostages go. They didn't have a choice, so he took their choice away. But the hostages were freed.
Yeah, so I would say that perhaps that situation was good, but what I take issue with would be this. If Mr. Purple, so like now I'm taking it out of just that situation and pushing it up to the register of God. If Mr. Purple could prevent all cases of crime at all times, not just the one, and chooses not to, I think that puts Mr. Purple on the hook, so to speak, for the crimes. And so if he prevented in that one spot, okay, that was good. But if Mr. Purple didn't continue to do that, I would take issue with it. And so I think when it gets pushed out to God, it's the same problem for me. If God could prevent genuine suffering and evil in the world, and only does it sometimes and not every time, I think that makes God liable for the instances when God chooses not to prevent those things. So it might be good in that moment, but if you expand it, then I have a problem.
So how do you do with like the Minority Report, where, they do have recognition of a crime that's going to happen, but it's not all of them? What then?
What do you mean? Sorry.
So like the Minority Report has the same qualm, I guess, where they get reports of major crimes that are going to happen and they mobilize to stop them before they happen, which you need to watch it if you haven't. It's really good.
I haven't. I can respond to this one too.
I didn't know if this was a show or real life or what. I was like, what is happening? This just sounds like the Winter Soldier.
To give you a context, in the Minority Report, there's this machine allows them to see the future, to see what crimes are about ready to happen. And since they can see the future, they can intervene in time to stop them before they're going to happen. Well, it turns out that it's not fully, it's not inerrant. It makes problems. And there's this Minority Report that's always there as well, what could also happen. But to answer that question, TJ, I think usual, standard, classic view of God falters in light of the Minority Report, because that classic view has a God who knows exactly what's going to happen in the future and has the power to stop it whenever that God wants to. But the God that at least Josh and I believe in doesn't know the future with absolute certainty, and so can't foresee with certainty when a crime is going to happen to be able to prevent it.
Yeah, so it's a lot more like, I wish I remember what that machine was called from the Minority Report.
Yeah.
It's just a lot more like that.
It's a good movie. Tom Cruise is the lead. Yeah, you guys ought to watch it.
Now I am going to watch it. I'm interested.
I think there's one other issue, though, that comes into play. As Josh was talking, I was saying, yep, I agree with everything he says. But he's pointing to a difference between Mr. Purple, even though I've never seen this show, and God.
In the show, it's usually called Kilgrave. I'm just a big comic nerd, so it's still Mr. Purple to me.
Okay. And that difference is that most people, myself included, think that God is omnipresent. And so God would be directly present to every potential evil that could occur. And because directly present, if that God was omnipotent, that God should, if that God's loving, stop it. So it's hard to do these analogies when you're talking about a localized individual like Mr. Purple versus an omnipresent spirit like most people think God is.
Yeah. But in that one moment, I'm going to push you on the same thing. Is what Mr. Purple did good?
Yeah, I don't know the scenario well enough, but if you're saying he did something that had both good, he prevented some evil, but then caused other evil, is that what you're saying?
He went into a situation, he took people's choice away, he forced the bad guys to let the innocent people go free, basically. But by taking their choice away, he's still doing something bad, even though it was to save people in that instance.
Yeah. I guess my answer to that is, who's faster, unicorns or mermaids? And by that I mean, when we have a scenario that's not realistic, in other words, this scenario has a person who's controlling other people, and I don't think that's ever possible at any time, then that's speculating on something that's, it's not going to get us anywhere because it's like a unicorn or a mermaid in a race.
Well, here's why I think it's important. Because I think if we can pin that down and say, yes, it was good because the outcome was good, then that brings a lot of questions to, okay, so if God knows the future and the outcome's going to be good, that means everything he does must be good. Yeah. But if we pin it down and say the act was bad because he was taking choice away, even though the outcome was good, that would suggest that God can't just be good because the outcome might be good in the end.
But that's where Josh's answer comes in, which I agree entirely with. Josh said, well, if he could take away freedom sometimes and doesn't do it all the time to prevent evil, then he's asleep on the job. He's not perfectly good. So I would go with Josh's answer there.
Okay. I'm gonna get a little bit into my own kind of weird thoughts, and then let you guys riff it and see if there's anything else we want to say, and we can start wrapping this up. I'm gonna tell some weird, maybe a little bit white-heady and a little bit Taoist. I don't know. We'll see. But so for me, just kind of my own, I guess, ontological view of God, maybe. I'm thinking from the wisdom of the Taoist tradition of this harmony, the thing that connects us all. And to me, God is that thing. But also from the Christian tradition, I still think I can commune with the harmony itself. So I think he's both the thing that connects us all as well as this entity that I am able to converse with. Right? And just to pile on things, I'm not convinced that time is real. What I know is real is each moment I am given. So I'm not guaranteed the outcome of any decision. So I would say that any one act, taking choice away, voting for someone guilty of sexual assault, whatever, it does not matter what the outcome is. What you did in that moment was still wrong. So I think the act itself matters regardless of the outcome. So to me, taking their choice away, even though people got freed and were saved, taking people's choice away was still wrong in that instance. That would just be kind of how I look at it. The outcome can be good without the action being good, I guess would be another way of wording that. That's less complicated.
Yeah, in ethics, this is a debate on whether or not actions are good based on their consequences or their motives. And I'm in the camp that thinks that motives are more important than consequences. But the motive has to be for good consequences. So consequences still matter. It's just that the motive is for good consequences. So if I do something out of love for my wife that ends in disaster and harms people, I wouldn't say I did evil because my motives were good. On the other hand, if I try to hurt somebody but accidentally help them, I wouldn't say I'm loving because I had bad motives and they ended up having good consequences. So I'm with you on there. But when it comes to time, I think everybody who denies the reality of time is a hypocrite.
All right. Look, heresy, hypocrite, I'm all of it today. It's fine.
Well, we all live as if time is real. Why go around pretending like it's not? No one can do it and live consistently.
Well, yes and no. That's a talk for another time. Because, you can believe in space-time without believing in time. They are different. But
I think our conceptions of time are going to vary, and there's going to be different models for time, et cetera. But I think every single one of us, including you, we all live as if time is real. I call it experiential non-negotiable. None of us gets out of that.
That's fair. Yeah. And I'm sure
it could not exist,
later,
but we still have to live like it does. So
so it doesn't matter. Anyway, did y'all have anything else you wanted to throw out there from the other podcast? I know at some point I said something that I was like, man, Tom's going to push me on that, but I don't remember what it was.
I'd like to riff a little bit of something on what Josh Patterson said, because he brought in process thought and pan-experientialism and these big words and such. I think Josh is pointing to something that is crucial for this discussion of Mr. Purple, God, how we live our lives, etc. And that is, if we're going to analyze not only God's action, but our own actions in terms of its morality, goodness, badness, appropriateness, or whatever, we have to take into account a whole wide variety of things pertaining to life, what philosophers call an ontology, what we think the world is like, what it's made up of. And most people in Western philosophy have had a view that said something like the small things of existence, maybe the quarks, cells, worms, plants, those things are inanimate stuff. They have no mentality, they have no freedom, they have no spontaneity. And then somehow, maybe it was an act of God, maybe evolution, somehow mentality and consciousness emerged. For some people, they think only humans have it. Other people think, our dogs and dolphins and elephants have it. But somehow in life, this agency mentality emerged. And then when we talk about divine action or our action, then we try to account for that in terms of this schema. And that's why some people just don't like the idea of a God who controls free will creatures like you and me and maybe dogs and dolphins and elephants. But they're usually pretty okay with God controlling quarks and worms and plants. But what Josh is pointing to is a different way of looking at reality that says that even down to the smallest level, there's some kind of subjectivity, mentality, agency. And if that's right, and it's a big if, but I think it's a good gamble, if that's right, then God's love and action, even toward the quarks, would be wrong if it was controlling, just like it would be wrong for God to control free will humans, if you believe it's wrong. But, assuming you're a free will theist, and if you extend that all the way down to the smallest parts of reality, I think you can provide a holistic picture of God's action in the world that can answer the biggest objections to belief in God at all.
Yeah, I don't know if this builds on that or complements that or what. And it's because, people like Josh Patterson and Tripp, and I think even you've mentioned my head before. Anyway, you guys made me think too much. And I especially since I was already leaning the Taoist thing, I am convinced all of us are defined by our relationships, not necessarily the bits and pieces that make us. And I think that's interesting to think about with what you were just talking about and in this conversation. and it kind of brings around circle for all those who are listening. It's like, why does any of this matter? Because whatever, and I'll go back to Mr. Purple because, again, I think it's easier. We see that he is incapable of love, and that defines his character because every time he speaks, people are controlled. So he's not able to be in an open relationship. See what I did there? But because of that, that defines who he is, because that's his relationship to everyone else. So I think that's true of each of us. So I think whatever you think of God in his relationship to you, when we say God is love, automatically we're defining him by his relationship to everything, right? Because he is love. And I think if you don't get something right about God's relationship to you, it's hard for you to be in a proper relationship with him, or, the divine, it, she, whatever you interpronoun here. So I think it's important for us to understand, just like it wouldn't really work if I knew my wife was married to me, but she didn't know. That wouldn't that wouldn't work. So I think it's important for us to understand our relationships so that we're engaging with them properly. So that's kind of why I would say all of this is important, and relationships matter, including your relationship to God and Jesus and one another, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about that, Tom? Do you have any final thoughts, words?
I like that. Maybe my final thought is that those of us who are listening, who may be thinking, okay, well, this God is love thing, that seems like pretty obvious. Not saying anything new here. God is relational. That sounds nice. I just might want to remind them that the most important, the most influential Christian theologians in history, and many of the most influential Muslim and Jewish Christians, they believed that we could love God, but God couldn't love us back. God didn't have the kind of relational influence for us to influence that God. And so what we're talking about here is actually a pretty radical idea. I think it's pretty biblical, but it's not what most Christian theologians have thought throughout history.
Why did they say that he couldn't love us back, for those who might not be familiar?
Yeah, they were really worried that a God who was affected by creation could be influenced to be bad, to be less than perfect. They wanted a God who was in all ways unchanging and unaffected, because they thought any effect from a sinful world or just anything less than perfect would make God less than perfect. And they didn't realize that they could affirm God's perfect nature of love, but also have a God who really perfectly changes and is influenced. But that's a major issue. And actually, that brings me to what I want to invite the three of you to, and anybody who's listening to this. I have decided to write a 3-volume systematic theology of love, and I'm going to be posting chapters of this on my Substack account, and I'd love for you to chime in and give me suggestions on how to improve it. The first volume is going to have about 12 chapters, and I think I've got 8 of them written, but I'm going to be bringing them out slowly in the coming months. If you'd be interested in helping me think through a systematic theology of love, come on over to my Substack and check it out.
Yeah. I think I am following your Substack. I'm pretty sure. I got to double check. So, I'll be happy to engage with that and jump over there too. So, this has been fun. This has been fun.
And now I am on your Substack. So really quick, tell us about OrtCon, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Well, Josh and I are going to be this summer at a really great resort called the Grand Targhee Resort between Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park, a Monday through Friday event on open and relational theology. We fly in and listen to speakers and go on hikes and just spend a great week together talking with people about big ideas related to open and relational thought. And it's a family-friendly kind of a thing. We don't work people too hard. We have conversations until noon, and then the rest of the day is pretty much off until evening. And then Josh is going to come in and help us in the evening to have conversations and have some fun at the bar. So, we'd love to have you come. It's like $1,000, I think, for a person, $1,000 a person if you're willing to share a room, and maybe $1,500 if you're single families, or $2,000 or something like that. But given the kind of prices in that part of the world, it's very reasonable. And more importantly, you get to hang out with fantastic people for a week.
Yeah. I'm planning on attending this year. It's going to be really cool. It also, I think the price, if I remember right, it includes like your stay and some food and drink, right?
Yes, right. Includes your accommodations and probably about 2/3 of your meals.
Yeah. And there's like horseback riding going on. Apparently, we're going to go to, I think, Yellowstone. We're gonna show up at some point. I'm like, this looks pretty rad. This looks pretty cool.
Yeah. The resort is famous in the summer for their downhill mountain biking because they take the ski runs and they put this great mountain bike track. But people like me, we go on hikes and it's not a must to do.
That'll be me. I'll hike. My leg doesn't permit biking yet, but hiking I can do. Yeah, so I'm excited for that. And I think we've shown a little bit. Some of us may just differ a little bit on ontology or like how we think of like God's relation to time or the future or process thought. But all of us kind of agree on this open and relational aspect. So I'm excited to have this OrtCon to learn a little bit more on the stuff I'm wrong about, because I know I'm wrong about plenty. If we say that's our practical action, that's what's going to bring people together. They're going to go there. They're going to learn about their relationship to God, and that's going to help their relationship to one another. If we do that, and that's our practical action, Tom, what do you think will change for those who attend OrtCon?
Most people who come leave thinking, I found my tribe. A lot of people show up, and some of them are newbies. They don't really know open and relational thought. Others are experts. But just the kind of community that gels there makes people feel like this is a family.
All right.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
So,
hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick break here. We skipped the God moment section in this bonus episode just due to time constraint. However, for the audio, I wanted to add something because after the episode, we all talked about that. And we mentioned that this episode itself was a God moment for us. So throughout this episode, we're just talking about the nature of God, what it means that God is loving, and what is our relationship to God. And sometimes just meditating on those things themselves. You don't need like a big moment of something that happened to you, but just to meditate on these things, to discuss them with other people, to think about God's love can itself be a God moment. And I thought it was just really cool. We all kind of mentioned that. So I wanted to add that in here and give you guys a chance to have your own God moment after the episode. Just take some time to meditate on these things. What is God's relationship to each of us, to all of creation, the quirks, everything, and what does that relationship he has mean to you, especially on this Good Friday as we meditate on what it means that God died. Also, after the show, we end up doing a Patreon segment, just me and the other Josh talking. We went through that rant he wanted to do about Good Friday, and we discussed some other stuff that we think are fundamental theological truths that we find incredibly important for all Christians. So please check that out over on Patreon. We actually listed it as free on Patreon. So if you go to Patreon, you don't need to pay anything to check that out. You can just listen to it as it is. And I think it's worth your time, and I would really appreciate you guys just hearing what Josh had to say. And I don't know. I love these guys. I appreciate them. And I appreciate all of you for being part of this God moment.
if you like the show, please consider sharing it with a friend. Share with an enemy. Share with your cousins. If you don't have cousins, share it with one of mine. They're tired of listening to me say it. So, buy the merch. Support the show. It means a lot. And it's comfy. And you're going to need something to wear hiking down that mountain.
Yeah. Get some comfy whole church merch for our hikes and hang out with us there. It'll be a fun time. I'm trying to, no, I don't think any other podcast in the network will be there. But other shows I'm on, if you want to listen to Dummy for Theology and then come tell me why I'm a dummy at OrtCon, you could do that. Other things maybe to check out, Let Nothing Move You, Christian Ashley, if you want to hear someone who's very different from most of us in their theology. He's also on the network, and we love Christian. Also, Kung Fu Pizza Party, Brandon Knight. If you just want some fun, it's Kung Fu and pizza. What's more fun than that?
Yeah. And speaking of Brandon Knight, I'm pretty sure he's going to be on next Whole Church. The release schedule, if I'm right, means next week we're going to be talking with Brandon Knight about his job as a ninja coach.
Oh, no, that's like 2 weeks from now.
Sweet. Then next, that's great.
Josh Patterson's actually
Josh Patterson next. It just feels weird to say that with him right here and us having done the recording in the past.
I'm taking over. I'm being coercive and taking over the whole church network.
Yeah, so coming up, we've got Josh Patterson, then Brandon Knight, and then we're going to do an encore episode for the Job Fair series on comic book writing. And then we're going to have a roundtable of pastors and professors to reflect on the series. And at the end of season 1, Francis Chan.
Also, the encore has been changed. It's now about science with Andy Walsh. He's the chief science officer somewhere. But that's a cool title.
Oh, Andy.
It's very Star Trek.
Andy's a great guy.
It. Yeah. Another host of Systematic Ecology. So check out that show. And then, bug Francis Chan for us, because we won't.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, you can always sponsor our efforts to educate and unite the church on Captivate, Patreon, or Apple Podcast. If you're not into the subscription thing, again, you can leave a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the description notes. Thank you again, and please come back next week.